Your objective for lesson 5 is I will partition a whole into equal parts and define the equal parts to identify the unit fraction. So we're going to take a whole and we're going to draw it to make it have equal parts, and then we are going to have to identify what the shaded part is. Okay, so looking at the circle on your board, I want you to write down how many equal parts are in this circle. And then should have put 2. What is the name of each unit? So each unit is this right here and this right here. So the name of each unit is 1/2. So I didn't want you to write that down because you might have been confused about what it meant by each unit. Remember, a unit is 1. So whenever we're looking at a fraction, we're talking about what does this stand for and what does this stand for out of the whole. And each one of those parts stands for 1/2. And then what is the fraction that is shaded? And that's also 1/2. We've learned already how to write this using numbers, but we're going to practice more on writing it with words and numbers during this lesson. So the way that you write this fraction down is by using it with a 1 and then a line with a 2 on the bottom, because the 2 on the bottom stands for 2 parts in all, and then the 1 on the top stands for 1 part being shaded. So on this, we're going to look at this, and I want you to write down how many equal parts are there. I also want you to go ahead and put what is the name of each unit. So what is the name of each one of these parts? And then write what fraction is shaded, and I want you to do that using numbers. Okay, so there are 3 equal parts. The name of each one of these parts is 1/3, and the part that is shaded is also 1/3, and this is how you write it using numbers. Okay, we're going to do the same thing on this page. Tell me how many equal parts there are, what is the name of each unit, and then write down what is the fraction that is shaded, and I want you to do that using numbers again. So there are 4 equal parts. Each part is 1/4, and the fraction that is shaded is 1/4 because there's 1 part shaded and there are 4 parts altogether. Okay, doing the same steps with this on your board. Make sure you're pushing pause whenever you're doing this so you can check your answers whenever you're ready. There are 8 equal parts, and each part is 1/8. And the fraction that is shaded is 1/8, because there are 8 equal parts and there's only 1 part shaded, because remember the number on the top of the fraction is the part that's shaded. Okay, so does this shape have equal parts, and how do you know? So when you look at this part and this part, you've got to ask yourself, do those 2 parts have an equal amount of space? Does each one look like it's exactly the same? If you were to cut them out and lay them on top of one another, would they be the same size? So if they're not equal, can we call this shape fourths? If they're not equal. If they are equal, can we call it fourths? Well, whenever you're looking at these 2 shapes on top of one another, they're not the same size, so we can't call this as fourths, because if we're using the word fourths, we're thinking of it of having 4 equal parts, and since this shape doesn't have 4 equal parts, we cannot say that it's cut into fourths. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start on the problem set. So if you want to get that out and get that ready. Okay, so we're going to fill in the chart, and then we're going to whisper the fractional unit, but we're not really going to whisper it because we're going to have to put that down on our paper. So for A, there are 2 equal parts on the triangle, so we're going to put 2 at the top part of this chart. And then this one says the total number of equal parts shaded, so there's 1 part shaded, so that's where we get the 1. unit form, this is kind of what we did on our board just now. What is the name of each unit in the fraction? And this side is 1/2 and this side is 1/2, so each unit would be 1/2. And yes, we do write it with words and numbers. We're not going to write it with numbers because it's not asking for the shaded part right now like this column is. And then this last column is what is the fraction? What is the fraction of what is already shaded? So since this first row is done for you, make sure you have that written down correctly because the next few we're going to work through together. So for part B, there are 3 parts total, and there's 1 part that is shaded. Each part on this rectangle is 1/3, and the fraction that is shaded is also 1/3, but we're writing that with numbers. Okay, when we're moving on down, there are 4 equal parts. 1 part is shaded. Each part in this rectangle is 1/4. And the fraction that is shaded is also 1/4. In this rectangle right here, there are 5 equal parts. There's 1 part that is shaded. Each part is 1/5, and the fraction that is shaded is 1/5. On E, there are 6 equal parts. There's 1 part that is shaded. Each part is 1/6, and the fraction that is shaded is 1/6. There are 8 equal parts on this one. There's 1 part that is shaded. Each part, meaning each one of these little squares, is 1/8, and the fraction that is shaded is 1/8. Okay, moving on to the back. Andre's mom baked his 2 favorite cakes for his birthday party. The cakes were the exact same size. Andre cut his first cake into 8 pieces for him and his 7 friends. The picture below shows how he cut it. Did Andre cut the cake into 8s? Explain your answer. So this is kind of what we looked like right before we did the problem set when we looked at that square or rectangle that was cut into 4 equal parts, and we had to figure out if we could call it 8s or not because the parts weren't equal. So you have to ask yourself the same thing for this right here. Did he cut his cake into 8s? By looking at the parts, are they all equal? Because that's going to help you explain your answer. So our answer is no. Let me change this to where it's not so large. No, because the parts are not equal. Because we know that whenever we're working with fractions and we're cutting anything into 4ths or 6ths or 8ths or 1/3s, they all have to be equal in order for us to have those parts. So the correct explanation is the parts are not equal to make it into 8ths. Okay, number 3 says 2 of Andre's friends came late to his party. They decide they will all share the second cake. Show how Andre can slice the cake so that he and his 9 friends each get an equal amount with none left over. What fraction of the cake will they each receive? So you have to ask yourself how many people are going to be eating the cake because that's going to tell you how many parts you're going to need for your cake. And since it's going to be him and his 9 friends, that's going to be 10 people total. So you're going to want to split this into 10 parts. So whenever I split it right down the middle, that gives me 2 parts on the top and 1 on the bottom. So now I'm just going to split it into 5 different sections because I know if I have 5 on the top and if I have 5 on the bottom, that's going to give me 10 in all. And you want to make sure that your parts are equal. I'm going to have to move my line some to make them more equal. So you may have to erase some of yours to make them equal if you haven't already done that. So it says, what fraction of the second cake will they each receive? It didn't say anything about shading it, but it does want to know what fraction will each friend receive. So if one person's going to get 1 piece of cake and there are 10 pieces of cake total, then that tells me that they're each going to have 1/10 of the cake. So each person will receive 1/10 of the cake. Number 4 says, Andre thinks it's strange that 1/10 of the cake would be less than 1/8 of the cake, since 10 is bigger than 8. To explain to Andre, draw two identical rectangles to represent the cakes. Show 1/10 shaded on one and 1/8 shaded on another. Label the unit fractions and explain to him which slice is bigger. So there's a lot being said in that problem. First thing that we need to know is that we're going to have two rectangles that are going to be the exact same size. And I'm going to cut them both down the middle because we want them to look very similar. And since one of them needs to have 8, so I'm going to have to cut one into 8 different parts. And I'll have to cut the other one into 4 different parts, or I'm sorry, not 4, but 10 different parts, just like what we did on that cake just now. And then we're going to have to shade 1/10 and we're going to have to shade 1/8. So I'm going to fix my lines to where they're more equal parts. So you can see the difference between 1/10 and 1/8. Because yes, you would think that 1/10 would be bigger than 1/8 because 10 is a bigger number. But the bottom number in your fraction, the denominator, the bigger that number is, the smaller the parts are, and that's one thing that you'll have to remember whenever we're working with fractions. So whenever you are shading this one part on your paper, you can see the size of it. And now whenever I go over here to shade 1/10, you can see the size of it compared to what 1/8 was. So when you look at these two pictures, you can tell which one is larger, which part is larger, and we can tell that this 1/10 is smaller than this 1/8. And it also said to label the unit fractions and explain to him which slice is bigger. So you're going to want to make sure that you're labeling this is 1/8 and this is a 1/10. And we're going to have to tell him which slice is larger. So we're going to put that 1/8 is the larger slice. Okay, so we're moving on to the exit slip. Whenever you are finished with that, make sure you bring that to me.